Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Legal Cheek podcast. My name's Lydia. I'm a writer and editor here at Legal Cheek, and I'm a future trainee solicitor. And I'm here with Legal Cheek's publisher, Alex Aldridge. And today we're going to be discussing how to secure a training contract this cycle.
Hi Lydia, nice to have you back.
Nice to be back.
So as Lydia says, we're talking about how to get a training contract this cycle. This podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, home of the private equity training contract. But we're not just talking about getting a training contract at Simpson Thatcher. Any firm that the principles apply for this podcast. So Lydia, you yourself are a future trainee, so you're very well positioned to talk about this. You worked at Legal Cheek last year, got your training contract, gone away to do the PGDL, and you've come back to join us for the summer. Sorry, my Slack just going in the background. Um, so to start off, I think one of the secrets to your success was you went early.
Yes. So as you say, I got my training contract last year. I did a winter vacation scheme. And I also applied the previous year. So I've got experience of failure and success, and sort of what to do differently. And I think one of the things that made a huge difference, was starting early. The first year that I applied for training contracts, and I think lots of people do it, they're not really sure what they want to do. Are they sure that they want to do law? Especially me, because I came from a non-law undergraduate degree. I went away traveling in the summer. I was sort of still thinking about what I wanted to do. And so when I came back, it wasn't too late. There were lots of things that were still open. But I think the following year, when I hadn't secured a training contract and I tried again, I really went early. And I mean early. I was in August. I was making lists of where I was going to apply. I was applying to open days, virtual insight days, legal cheek events, all of those things in mid-August, very early September. And that made a huge difference to me because they're so competitive, the training contracts, and so many people apply. And I almost just think, just from a numbers game perspective, some people start applying in October, and if you're there on the 1st of September and you're applying, and there's a firm that closes in mid-September, you might be one of the few that have been on it enough to sneak your application in before the rush, especially for things like winter vacation
Yeah.
schemes for the firms that offer that. Um, that's that really worked for me, and I got such different results when I was really on it from right from the beginning. So I definitely recommend doing that.
Good advice. There's those winter vacation schemes are a good opportunity actually because the applications often open really quite early for those. Not all firms do them, but it's worth having a look for those. I mean, check it on Legal Sheet. We've obviously got our key deadlines calendar, which have got it's kind of very comprehensive deadline listings. We put stuff into there as early as we can, but often we're limited by when the firms go live with these opportunities. So we can't put the deadline up before it's actually up on the firm's website. Some of the firms I mean, we're working through updating them at the moment, and some of the firms have given these already. Many haven't yet, but I think that'll be one of the things, just keeping a real close eye on that deadlines calendar. We put things in as quick as we can, and then getting on to some of those early opportunities. We also open our events early. So we've got our big kickoff event, which is our September virtual law fair. So we've got like 60 plus big firms at that on the 2nd of September. Um, and I think we open that in, it's been opened quite a few weeks. It's worth getting signed up to that. And then we use that list of students signed up to that to kind of give them early info about kind of early opportunities rather than just send it out more generally. So like, for example, there's an event we've got with McFarlane's, which I think is next week, which is like it's a first of this new cycle. So we've used that to promote that. Then we've got our Legal Cheek Live in London event, which is like a big in-person event on I think the 9th of September with like 40 firms. Again, we just submitting it to the virtual fair list. So I think go on our events and just look at all of the early stuff. We're chasing down a number of firms to go live with their September exclusive events at the moment. We've got Legal Cheek Lives around the country. And so yeah, so I think I'd say yeah, combination for those of you who want to go early, look on our events page for early stuff. Why not just? I mean, I, I think the principle, Lydia, of signing up to as mo many things as you can is probably a good one.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's another a definite another tip of just go to as much as you possibly can. Um, that's the Legal Cheek Fair, the firm's own open days and insights events, which you can find on our key deadlines calendar when they sort of get announced and decided on. Um, yeah, so whether it's those events, I mean, we do so many of them almost every day during the autumn, and there are
Yeah,
so many to choose from. And I would really, really encourage people to just go to as many as you possibly can. Even if you're not that interested in applying to that specific firm, you will discover so much about the areas of business and law that they're talking about that will transform your kind of understanding of how graduate recruitment works and what they're looking for. We always have virtual networking with graduate recruiters after our events, so you get a sense of what they're looking for, and you get a sense of how law works, what solicitors do, things like that. Even if it's not a firm that's at the top of your list, I think it's always worth your while to just hear about it, and find out lots about lots of different really interesting areas of business and law.
definitely, definitely. And I suppose September's a good time for doing this because you've not gone back to uni. You've kind of got more time to really throw yourself into it. And I think firms have recognized that, and we've noticed a lot kind of going quite early, deliberately for that reason. I think back in the day, it was always around the uni timetable because that was by going to kind of physical law fairs, that was the kind of main way firms could reach students. Whereas now with sort of social media online, you can go early, and there's a trend to do that, and it makes sense. Yeah, Lydia, you mentioned sort of starting to understand how the kind of graduate recruitment, kind of early careers, kind of almost like a game, how it works really. And I think that's quite important because it's yeah, how would you describe that? How can students play that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's interesting talking about it as a game, because I think in a way, I mean it is a game, and you've got to figure out how to show yourself in the best possible way, and find out what people are looking for. But I think it's also easy to overthink it. I guess it is a game, but it's not a very complicated game. Um, all of the firms, and it's hard. It's really, really hard because there are so many bright and enthusiastic and keen people, and only so many training contract places. And it is hard. It's really hard. But they're not. It's not rocket science. I think it's hard because lots and lots of great people apply, and there's only so many spaces. But it's not complicated, if that makes sense. Um, they're all looking for very similar things, which are, knowledge of the firm, knowledge of the areas of law that the firm practices in, a basic understanding of what solicitors do, what does it mean to advise a client, and things like that. They're all looking for those sort of similar things, and you can kind of get a grasp on it if you do come to our events, and if you do meet people in graduate recruitment, whether that's in person or virtually at our law fairs and things like that. Um, you will hear the same things again and again. And I think it is easy to overthink it, especially if you're struggling to get positive results. I definitely did in my first year of applying. I got so many rejections and so many applications that were just rejected, no interview or progression at all. And it's easy when you're getting that feedback to think, gosh, there must be something I'm missing. There must be something really complicated that is going on that everybody knows and I don't. And I think it's not. I think enthusiasm is a really big thing, and there are so many smart people who apply for law. So you can't rely on your academic grades alone to make you stand out. So I think enthusiasm, showing that you've been to events, showing that where you can, you've done things that are related to law. I mean, that those are the things that they can point to and say, okay, this person's really serious. They've really thought about it. Um, and it is as simple as that, just showing that keenness and having stuff to write down on an application form that just is something that is solid that you've done. It doesn't have to be applied for or paid work experience or anything at all. Like all of our events are completely free to come to.
Yeah.
Write an article for the Legal Chic Journal. Anyone can submit
Yeah.
that, and that's something that you've done, that shows that you're keen and interested. There are so many things you can do, and I think that kind of enthusiasm is what graduate recruitment are looking for because they're choosing between so many people that would all do a brilliant job.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be a genius, but I think you have to be keen and show that you're being keen.
Yeah, I think maybe game might be the wrong term. There's almost like a kind of maybe an etiquette to it almost. And it's I think you've got to show why you're interested in that firm. And okay, the reality is many of the firms do have similar practice areas, offer a similar training experience, but you've got to show why you're applying for that firm. And that means, and obviously you're not just going to apply to a single firm. We'll get onto that in a second, but you've got to kind of they expect a kind of interaction with the firm, whether that's at an online event or an in-person event. And then you evidence that in your application form. And it's like that is that not and because whilst there's a lot of people applying, kind of a lot of people kind of don't realize that some of the sort of simple things that they need to do. So if you could evidence a good um a basic interaction where I met the firm at Legal Chic September Virtual Law Fair, and I heard them speak about whatever they were speaking about. If you spend 10 minutes in a booth just asking a question, observing some other questions, there'd be enough there just to have that'd be a solid evidence of an interaction. And then further, I followed that up by attending this event that they did on X commercial awareness topic. And then I met them at, Legal Cheat Live event in London or Birmingham or wherever, where I spoke to whoever name about what. And like that's really valuable. And it doesn't have to be this incredible interaction, but it just that shows, and that's going beyond where most applicants would, and it does really make you stand out. I think sometimes there's a danger that students think, oh no, that's not enough almost. And they think, okay, I need to do something incredible to stand out. And like, I don't know, go to that firm's office and go and ask to meet the managing partner or something that would put you don't need to put yourself into like the 0.001% of doing unusual things to engage with the firm. You need to put yourself into kind of the top, would you say 5 to 10% almost, Lydia, of
Yeah,
knowing
yeah,
how to play the game or follow the kind of etiquette.
yeah. It's interesting. You almost have to court them slightly, I think. And if you do have a firm or a couple of firms that you are really keen on and you think you'd be really interested in training at, you do almost have to woo them a bit and say, oh, I went to your insight day, oh, and I spoke to you at this law fair, oh, and I went to your event on this, and show that you're there and you're doing stuff. And I think, just if you think of it in a very just practical human way, the graduate recruitment teams at these law firms put effort into arranging open days at the firm or virtual insight events. They put effort into coming up with topics and speakers for our legal cheek events. So it's nice when people go and say that they've enjoyed it and they've learned something. And you don't have to go to a fair and speak to graduate recruitment and wow them and impress them. You just have to, I think they appreciate people turning up and having a good time and learning something, as anyone would if you put effort into organizing something. It's great when people come and have
Yeah.
a good time. So I do think, just in a way, just letting them know that you're going to all of the stuff that they, you know, I guess take the trouble to put on, and that you're there. And I think it just makes a nice impression, and they like to see that.
That's such good advice. And I think, yeah, practical and human is don't underestimate that. Don't underestimate that. That's really important. So that's kind of the graduate recruitment side. Looking now to kind of more the kind of commercial awareness side. Because that's an area students struggle with. And I think the starting point, Lydia, obviously you developed your commercial awareness a lot when you're working for the Legal Cheek, and I think you were a non-law student at this point. You've now done the GDL, um, and it seems that sometimes students tend to overestimate the importance of law, but underestimate the importance of kind of business knowledge.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true. I before I did my conversion course, I knew nothing about law, like nothing about the actual nuts and bolts of, contracts and binding or not or anything. I didn't know any of that. And
Did you do an English
I did
degree?
an
Yeah,
English literature
yeah.
undergrad
Mm.
degree. So I was not doing law or even anything really that similar. But I almost think it makes it easier to, as a non-law student in some ways, to focus things on commercial and business commercial awareness. Because I didn't know anything about law, and it's not the sort of thing that you can. I mean, you obviously can research it, but I was starting from that zero, so it was quite. I sort of had to like lean in and think about things commercially and think about it from like a business perspective because I didn't know what the contracts would look like or what the legal issues would be, maybe very, very broadly. But I think it can sometimes be hard for law students who spent 3 or 4 years getting really into, the weeds of law and they often really enjoyed their degrees to then come to the application cycle and have that not be the focus. I think that can be hard, but you definitely, I mean, I secured my training contract with zero legal knowledge. I think it's about understanding how the firm works as a business, understanding what solicitors do. I feel like that's a
Yeah.
bit underrated. Like what
Yeah.
does it mean when a client instructs you? Like who are these clients and what do they ask for and what are their aims? Um, I think that sort of thing it seems so obvious, but if you can actually get a bit of a handle on like, okay, so this is how the business works, this is how they make money, this is, um, how it all works, how they attract work, this is why clients come to lawyers, all of that stuff that sounds so obvious, but I think lots of people who apply don't quite have a
Yeah.
grasp of it. I
Yeah.
definitely didn't when I started applying. And sometimes I think it can show through that you're a little bit woolly on what a law firm is and how it works, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's often fairly it's maybe basic's the wrong word, but it's not complicated. You almost need a kind of, I think, kind of like a journalistic knowledge of business. So not a mega deep knowledge, but a kind of knowledge of the basics. And recently I was doing a talk on our summer virtual vac scheme, and I kind of I noticed I was drinking a cup of coffee from an independent coffee place that I'd chosen rather than going to Starbucks, which is kind of next door to it. And I was thinking about kind of why I'd done that, and it was because the coffee was nicer than Starbucks, which personally I don't think the coffee at Starbucks is that nice. And you think coffee is such a saturated market, but this independent place had come in selling this nice kind of barista coffee. It's very popular. There's always a big queue. The queue's always much longer than Starbucks. And I was thinking, well, this place, it's possible it might expand, and as it would expand, it would need to take on new premises, and then there'd be leases for that. And so I was thinking that's where they might have to go to lawyers to negotiate a lease, and they might get external investment. And indeed, this is the journey that Starbucks itself went on from just being a tiny little independent coffee place, I think in Seattle. It's going to own this multinational chain, and they would have got some investment at some point. And in order to get the investment, well, in order to deal with the complicated money coming in and who owns what and what stakes are in the business, etc., you really do need lawyers. You need good contracts at that point. And this small independent cafe might get bigger and bigger. And like Starbucks, one day it might end up doing an IPO, an initial public offering. So go from being a private company to a publicly listed company. And that means members of the public like us, we could buy shares in Starbucks. You can do that. And maybe this little cafe that I go to, maybe that will one day happen. But obviously, an IPO, that's really complicated. You're getting listed on the stock market. You need to do like a prospectus and essentially a sales document for people to buy the shares. Everything's got to be in good order. Pension funds then go in to buy stakes of your business, like they have in Starbucks. Can't just be Wild West stuff. Everything's got to be um, well organized, and um, the books have got to be balanced, etc., etc. There's going to be loads of lawyers working on that, and I think you talk through an example like that, and you get an idea of kind of like the corporate life cycle of from startup to IPO. That's happening the whole time. And then when you think about something like that, you think about where the lawyers come in. So, and then you start to get a sense of where law firms sit within the broader kind of commercial ecosystem. And I think like having a story like that is really helpful. I talked about some books that are good to read. Like I really enjoyed the book called Shoe Dog, which is by the founder of Nike, and he talks about the incredible journey of essentially it was like a passion, following his passion for like Japanese shoes, how it became this like mega business. And a lot of businesses are like that. They're just kind of passions that become something much bigger. Talked about TV that I enjoyed, like Breaking Bad. That's a great story of, okay, it's building an illegal drugs business, but it's still the principle of building a business. You've got a great lawyer in that, Saul Goodman, and he really does sum up where how a lawyer interacts with his client and gives not just legal advice, but much more commercial advice. And you really do see the kind of the role of a good lawyer in Breaking Bad. I'd say that's a really good show for building commercial awareness. A novel I like, White Tiger, um, about a very ambitious guy in India and um, how he essentially builds his business in a very kind of anyway, I won't give too many spoilers, but I feel like these stories are really helpful. And then you can start to write, once you've got the basics of the kind of commercial ecosystem, then you can start to read a bit of the FT, get a student, and a few interesting stories that you might like following. Like, I mean, I feel like the SpaceX IPO, that's such a good one because it's amazing the journey of that company, and then it's promising some really quite far-fetched stuff, which says a lot about the state of the market. It's so much rich stuff that you can delve into. And Lydia, I think a lot of the commercial awareness events that we do in the autumn, well, you chaired many of these in the previous cycle, and you do really you've often got really top lawyers speaking on these events, giving a real insight into the sort of working on things like the SpaceX IPO. Um,
Yeah, no, it's amazing. Yeah, and it's amazing how some quite high up people do come and speak and are interested in explaining things to students and graduates and stuff like that. I think getting a real handle on as you said, the business life cycle, I think it's quite useful to think of it like that. And just some of those basic things. I also there's a website called Investopedia, which does like really, it's like Wikipedia for I guess finance, but it does really basic, very digestible, explanations of what is debt finance, what is private equity, what is it, and often when I would sort of come across these things and think, oh, what actually is private equity, I would that would be my starting point, and it's super just getting like a very basic handle where you're like, okay, I'm not an expert, but I sort of know how this works. And I think if you just get that quite, I don't know, rudimentary but solid understanding of these sorts of things, um, I think it's good, and they're not expecting you to be an expert as well. I think that's something else I kind of discovered during my multiple cycles of applying for training contracts. I think when I first started applying, maybe this is more for interviews, but I did get a couple of interviews and I found it so hard to talk about anything commercial because I was so aware that I was not an expert. I didn't really know all the details of how everything worked. And I think for my second round of applying, I thought, look, they're not expecting me to give a PhD thesis. They just want to know, oh, private equity firms buy businesses and sell them within a short period of time to make money, like that sort of thing. And don't be scared to give that basic explanation and
Yeah.
don't feel self-conscious that you're talking to somebody who knows so much more than you and you sound like you don't know anything. And I would just get flustered and talk myself into holes and go, well, I know that I don't really understand, and it's probably more complicated than that. Or, oh, and it might be sometimes a bit like this and all that. They are looking for you to have a solid grasp on the basics
Yeah.
of how businesses work. And I think when I um realized that, it made things a lot easier, particularly at the like later stages when you're interviews and stuff like that. And I think also things like understanding the trainee role is something else where it's a very common question in interviews, say, or what do you think you'd be doing if you worked here? And having a just a bit of an understanding of where trainees sit within the law firm, and what kind of tasks they do. But that's something else that I definitely overcomplicated early on when I was applying, and I would go, well, I don't really know because I've obviously never done it, and I just have to do it to know that if I knew or if I didn't know or whatever. And then I think I had the interview for the firm that I am going to train at. And she said, so what do you think you'd be doing if you were working um, if you're working on in the corporate team, what kind of tasks do you
Mm.
think that trainees would get involved with? And I just said, oh, I think probably due diligence. And she was like, yes. And it was like, next question. Like you don't have to be like, well, I don't know. I'm sure it would be da 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 da. Like you kind of you need to know the basics and be confident to say what you do know because they're not expecting you to know everything. Um,
Mm.
so I don't know. That's something else that I found.
That's a very good point. I often see with students in they skip through the basics, they never grasp the basics, and they try to go straight to complexity, which is very much like the icing on that. You can't do complexity without the basics. And sometimes you see it in questions that they'll ask these really complicated questions and you're trying to unravel them and you realize, oh, you know what? The person asking this question just actually doesn't understand, doesn't really know what they're talking about. And
Yeah.
it's a bit of a kind of word salad and stuff. So I think it's a good principle of if it's really you've got to understand it yourself and yeah, you can layer on once you've really got the basics, then you can go into more complicated stuff, but you can't do it the other way around. I think another thing you touched on, Lydia, was kind of understanding law firms themselves a bit and how they operate. And that's, talked a little bit about the kind of understanding the kind of commercial ecosystem and the journey from startup to IPO. But it's easy to forget that law firms themselves are businesses, right? So they're advising companies on that journey, but they themselves are businesses which have to make money. And often I hear this time and time from partners is that the students just don't think of them like they think this law is this kind of higher calling that is beyond money. And that really kind of annoys the partners. And their job is to run them, be good stewards and run them as businesses and make money. And so think about how law firms charge. They have hourly rates. Um, think about how they attract business, how they win new work, how they maintain those relationships. Um, all those kind of things around the business of law. Have a look on the legal chief firm profiles and on most list of what's the revenue of that firm, what's the profitability. If you have those two metrics, it tells you a lot about the size of the organization and the sort of quality of the work they do, the types of clients they act for, blah 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 blah. That I think that's important. Um, this is important. Different charging models. Are you charging by the hour? Are you doing fixed fee? Um, all those kind of things are useful to explore. Um, I think the kind of the final limb I think we wanted to cover was the idea of strategy. Like how many how many firms do you apply to, for example, in a cycle, and what should your broader expectations be?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think the common advice is definitely to apply to fewer firms rather than lots. And I do think there's a lot of people say 8 to 10. I feel like I've heard people say that loads and say 8 to 10 is what you should aim for. I definitely, in my first cycle, I applied for like 45 because I just kept getting rejected. And I'm not saying that is maybe not the best way, but I am a bit of a proponent for, I think it is a numbers game. And it's hard to say that, but that doesn't come, as long as that doesn't come at the expense of quality. And I think if you're really keen to secure a training contract this cycle, and you think maybe you've had a few cycles where, you didn't manage to get anything. I think that's so common. Like 90% of people who are doing law that I've spoken to have had a whole year where they just didn't get anything. Um, and you think this is my year, then if you're applying to even 8 firms, it's so hard. And even on the cycle where I was successful, I I think different the ch changes that I made in my strategy, my approach, getting on it really soon, being super keen and going to loads of events, it made a massive difference. And I was lucky, and I was getting lots of interviews and lots of and eventually like progressing. But there were still so many firms that just rejected me straight off. No interview, no nothing, no Watson Glazer, no second stage test or anything like that. And I just think if I'd only applied to those
Yeah.
if I had 5 firms that I went to the assessment center for, and then 5 that just rejected me straight away, if I'd only applied to those like my applications are obviously sort of getting somewhere, like they're not rubbish, but there is a sort of luck and numbers element to it. And I just kept thinking, gosh, if I'd never applied to such and such firm, I would be thinking that this was going so badly. But because I applied
Well,
to them and they've progressed my application, I feel like it's going super well. And if I, but if for like, and it's not, there was no real common theme in the firms where I was getting further, and the ones that there is an element of luck to it because there are so many
mm,
people that want to be lawyers and have training contracts, and there are so many people that have amazing degrees from great unis and have done loads of work experience and been to loads of events. Like there is a luck element. So I think I don't know. I'm always quite shocked, but there are people who they're applying for very, very few firms. Um, like I know somebody who applied for 3 and got offers from 2, and you
wow.
just think, wow, like wow, like, but that to me scares. I'm like, how could you just apply? And I know, I mean, someone who applied to 1 and got it. So, um,
Yeah.
but then it's like that's so.
I wouldn't advise that.
I know I wouldn't advise that because that scares me. But then it works, and if you're able, I think, but then the thing is, I'm a proponent for applying to more rather than fewer. However, what you can't do, which is definitely what I did when I first applied, is just fire them off in like a mad, desperate rush because you're stressed that you haven't got anything, and you just think, and you're copy and pasting just
Mm,
applications and changing them, and you're applying the day before the deadline and that
mm,
sort of thing. That's not going to work. I would say 15. I know it seems lots, but you have to put
yeah.
effort into them all, and it's a time sink, and it's hard. um but as long as you're putting in, as long as you're submitting quality applications, I do think there's a benefit for doing more.
And maybe it's do it if you start early, you have the
Yeah.
time to do that. Just
Yeah, that was
yeah.
definitely,
Yeah.
and I think, to be honest, once I got my offer for the winter vacation scheme, I just completely stopped applying after that because my motivation, even though it was maybe silly because you're never guaranteed to get the return offer, but my motivation was just completely gone. And maybe I did spend quite a lot of time on it. So there's definitely the risk of sort of like overdoing it and getting sick of it and thinking I just can't open another application form if you do spend a lot of time on it. But Something else I'd recommend as well is kind of just keeping going in a way. I know lots of people who, if they haven't sort of had any luck by around February, are just like, oh well, that's me for this year. Try again next year. But lots of firms open direct to training contract routes
True.
in March,
Mm,
April. I mean, I guess take this advice with a pinch of salt because I ultimately wasn't successful. But my first year where I applied to tons in October, November, didn't really get anywhere. And then I just kept going and I was applying to like every like direct to training contract in March, in April. I was going to assessment centers in June, July, and I
mm,
didn't get a training contract, but I did get on the waiting list for one that I applied to in like the end of March and I got to some assessment centers and I learned a lot from that experience. And I just think it's maybe an underrated thing to do if you're not completely sick of it. And if you
yeah.
are, then fine and have time off and you can try again next year. And everybody has years where they just get nothing. But I do kind of think there's some pros to just kind of just plugging away at it. And I think I had some luck and I learned a
Yeah.
lot. And
I
those
think you
experiences.
crucially you learn a lot because you do that. I mean, for your confidence to get on the waiting list, even though you miss out, that's going to really help you
Yeah,
in the next
definitely.
cycle.
Definitely.
I
And
think
I was really exhausted, to be honest, and I just did keep going. And then I went from doing that in like still applying in like July to then applying for the next ones in August. So if you are sick of it, you just give it a break and then come with fresh eyes. And you don't have to keep going if you don't. But if you do feel like, oh, it's January, it's February, I wish I could have some more chances, then there are openings. And if you're
yeah,
interested in going for it, then do.
yeah, yeah. I think it's tough with kind of rejection to keep going. I've seen psychologically that's it's very hard when once you get a few rejections. And I've seen people's heads kind of really go down with that. And actually for that people who've gone on to get training contracts at really good firms, but they've been really hit by that. And I think but again, seeing lots of people many people who work for Legal Cheap for a year or two, secure a training contract in that time. And so I've seen lots of them come through, and I think it's a good idea to say to yourself, look, this is a this is a long-term thing that I'm doing. I'm probably not going to secure a training contract this cycle. Have that as your almost assumption. Maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but say, look, I'm going to look at this as at least two cycles, and I'm going to give myself the space of at least two cycles. It's easy when in your early 20s and you think, oh, even your mid 20s, in your late 20s, you think, I'm getting older, my friends are getting past me, blah, 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 blah. But actually, you're still young and you've got like a year here or there is really not going to make any difference. So, um, you mentioned Lydia, it took you two cycles
Yeah,
to
yeah.
get one.
And
Um,
everybody that I've met and spoke to about applying for law, there are lucky and very like dedicated and smart people that do get it on the first time that they try, but that is the exception and not the rule. And it's so hard when you're in the midst of just getting email after email that's telling you that they don't want you. And it is so tough, and I've 100% been there. But that is the norm, and don't feel like it's you because it's really not. And having done a law conversion course this year, I was in a class with lots of people that had training contracts at lots of great firms. And I think I don't think I've met anybody who got it. I'm trying to think, but I genuinely don't think I met anybody who received their training contract the first year they applied for one. And that was like a class of 30. I'm genuinely trying to think. It's 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 a long-term thing and it is really tough. But
it's
yeah.
almost like that's an unofficial part of the process is it's a filter of dealing with rejection, and you have to pass that to get through. And it's and a lot of people don't realize that. The other thing is I see how much stronger people are when they've passed through the rejection thing, felt the disappointment, come to terms with it, decided to go again. They're really much sharper on
Yeah.
that second cycle. They're putting in, they've learned so much, and that's kind of when they're ready.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. I think it's definitely true what you say that it's an unofficial part of the process. I remember so clearly getting feedback, telephone feedback after an assessment center after I was rejected. And the graduate recruitment professional on the phone saying to me, "Well, maybe we'll see you next year." At the time, this is quite early. I was thinking, next year? Like, I want to get a training contract this year. But for that, I think they all know that. And people, another thing about strategy as well, that some people say, "Oh, I would never apply again to such and such firm because they rejected me last year. They obviously don't like me." Like they're
yeah,
obviously building it into the process. Like they invited me to an assessment center. They obviously didn't choose me, and they call me up and say, "Well, we'll hopefully see you next year." Like they expect that, and there's no sort of "we've told you to." Don't darken our doors again, kind of like there's none of that at all. And I
yeah,
applied to the firm that I am going to train at the year before, and I didn't even get an interview or anything. And then the next year, and they 100% expect you to apply again and just do it. Don't be prideful about it as well. Like
mm,
lots of people don't make it as not personal. And if you do genuinely think you would enjoy training there, apply again. Don't even hesitate.
great advice, great advice. And sometimes it's more than 2 years. It's not just 2
Yeah.
years.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Sometimes
yeah. For sure, for sure.
it takes more than that. Great stuff. I think we've got some really, really good advice there. Um, I think we've covered pretty much every. Any final tips, Liv, that you can think of?
No, I would say my main tip is start early. That's my main tip.
Start
Get
early.
started. Start now.
Sign up to that Legal Cheat September virtual law fair and um, lots of other stuff that we've got on the site. Get going. Look out for those early deadlines in the key deadlines calendar. The firms, like particularly those winter vac schemes, are good, aren't they? The Legal Cheat podcast is sponsored by Simpson Thatcher, home of the private equity training contract. We'll see you soon.
See you soon.